In Tech Matters, a busy week for the Federal Communications Commission. We start with the broadcast incentive auction. On Tuesday, the FCC opened a first-of-its-kind auction designed to encourage licensees to voluntarily relinquish spectrum usage rights in exchange for a share of the proceeds. It could net tens of billions of dollars. Joining me with the latest is Lydia Beyoud, telecom reporter for Bloomberg BNA. Lydia, let's talk about the timeline here. In late April, we'll get a better picture of how much spectrum is at stake. In May, this auction will really ramp up. Tell us more.
That's right. This is the first time the FCC or any agency has tried a two-sided auction of this sort. So although the official kickoff date was March 29th, not much is going to be happening right now, but as you said, things will accelerate in late spring, and that's when broadcasters will actually start taking bids that will go down, actually, to sell their spectrum back to the FCC. The FCC will, a little bit later after that part of the auction closes, turn around and sell it back to wireless providers. And it's not just the big four, it's a lot of regional wireless providers, as well as some groups like Dish Network, which is the satellite company, and even Comcast Corporation are also in the bidding wars.
I'll have more on the sell back in just a second. And this is an entirely novel endeavor for the FCC. There's a lot on the line. What happens if it works out, and what happens if it flops?
So this auction is the creation of Congress back in 2012, and there's a little bit at stake for them as well. The hope is that the auction will be a success and relinquish over 100 megahertz of spectrum to the wireless industry. If that happens, it'll be great for consumers, great for the wireless industry. Now, if it's a flop, it's really going to be a problem for the FCC. Congress has oversight of the agency, and you can bet that if there's any sort of failure or pressure point, Congress will have them in for hearings.
All right, all makes sense. Spectrum is a finite resource. The Defense Department owns a lot of it, and for good reason. How could this auction impact them down the road?
This auction is going to be a proof of concept for what could happen with federal spectrum. If it works out, and the FCC is certainly confident that it will, agencies like the Department of Defense, which holds a lot of spectrum nationwide, and other agencies like Department of Interior could be incentivized somehow, probably through the sharing of auction proceeds, to give up a portion of their spectrum as well and maybe move to other bands and share with other agencies or even with private users. So if this works out, it could prove a model for the federal government to follow and maybe even internationally.
Now, Lydia, on Thursday, the FCC started the rulemaking process that will decide whether or not Internet service providers can share consumer data with third parties. Explain that.
So this is a proposed rule from the FCC, and what they want to do is give consumers more choice over how their internet service provider shares and sells the data that they collect on their customers. The idea is that they would give consumers control to consent by opting in to having that data shared with a third party that would then build a profile about you and send you targeted advertisements. ISPs really want to keep control of that, and if it becomes an opt-in, which is a higher hurdle than the current opt-out, which requires the consumer to be aware and go in and change their settings, they're worried that they could lose quite a bit of revenue.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is an entire ecosystem hoping to purchase consumer data. How will this rulemaking process affect them?
That's right. There are data brokers, there are app developers and marketers who all buy this information from ISPs, and they could have less insight into what consumers want and how to specifically target their products directly to you and me. So they could also really be impacted by this, and it would also push them to buying even more data than they already do from folks like Facebook and Google. And ISPs say that that puts them at a disadvantage with those internet companies.
One more thing I want to ask you about. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, namely net neutrality. What's the latest?
So there's a federal court that's expected to rule any day, really, on the outcome of those rules, and it could have quite an impact on the FCC and the wireless and the cable internet industries. No one really knows what's going to happen. There's been some rumor that they might strike the rules down in part, maybe in whole, or they could uphold them. The idea was that if the rules are upheld by the court, they would seek an appeal to the Supreme Court, but with Justice Scalia's death and a vacancy on the bench, it's no longer quite certain that they would necessarily go that route. But certainly, there's more to come on those fronts, no matter what happens.
Lydia Beyoud, telecom reporter for Bloomberg BNA. Thanks, Lydia.
Thank you.